So I'm originally from Cali, Colombia. So when you talk to Colombians, we typically think about football, magical realism, and if you're from Cali, then typically salsa, right? So in Cali, there is a sort of social Darwinism where if you don't learn how to dance, it is unlikely that you'll pass your genes on to the next generation. So this is my family. From left to right, that's my sister, my mom, my dad, my grandma, and then me in the back, looking like I don't want to be in the picture, but I really did. My dad and my grandma are from El Chocó. So El Chocó is a very poor and neglected part of Colombia. And they emigrated to Cali, to try to make it. My grandma was a single mother because my grandpa abandoned them. So all of this to say that sort of my dad and my grandma broke a very, very resilient cycle of poverty in our family. So I guess the message that I wanted to convey with this picture is the idea of initial conditions. Initial conditions. My dad, I've heard sort of my family members talk about my dad as being the smart one, right? Like a very smart guy. But the conditions that you start with are very important. So if you're a mentor and you have power, please keep in mind the initial conditions of the people that you engage with, okay? So speaking of initial conditions, so imagine that you throw a ball up in the air. So if you do it, you will probably get that. And as scientists, if we see a phenomenon and we want to understand it, we typically collect data, okay? So in this case, imagine that for every time step, for every time T0, T1, T2 through Tn, you record the horizontal position X of the ball and the vertical position Y of the ball, okay? And again, the goal is to understand the idea of parabolic movement from the data set that we just collected. The data is sort of low dimensional enough, right? So it lives in three-dimensional Euclidean space that you can actually plot it. So if you plot sort of X versus T, you get something that looks like a line. And if you plot sort of Y versus X, you get a parabola, okay? So if you just ask the question, right, so what is the shape of the data set I'm looking at, it suggests for you mathematical equations, correct? So for the picture on the left, you hopefully get a line, and then for the picture on the right, you get a parabola. And again, we have very good algorithms to fit good parameters, sort of M, A, B, and C to the data we collect. And if you want to delve a little bit deeper into the physics, you can sort of, connect that to gravity and initial velocity. So it's a very, very satisfying sort of picture here of parabolic movement. I want your help in doing something similar for a different data set, okay? So this is the data. So the data is going to be a collection of images of a little ducky in different positions. Again, every image, each image is a data point. You can think of the image as a matrix of, let's say, 128 pixels by 128 pixels, and then the value of the pixel is sort of how black or how white that pixel is, okay? So we have a bunch of points in Euclidean space of dimension 128 by 128, and let's ask the same question, right? So what is the shape of the data set we're looking at? Is it a line? Is it a parabola? Any suggestions? Yes? A circle. Why?
It looks like it's only a rotation of a three-dimensional object.
Boom. Nailed it. So if you apply something like principal component analysis, which is a method for dimensionality reduction, and you actually place the little duckies in the sort of Euclidean coordinate from PCA, you get the picture on the right. So it really is a circle. You can see that as you go around the circle, the little ducky is turning around, okay? So again, if you ask what is the shape of this data set, one, it is a circle. And if you ask what is the model, then it's perhaps not an equation anymore, but a shape, right? A circular shape. And that is exactly what topology is all about. Topology is the mathematics of shape. And the idea is to study mathematical objects up to continuous deformations, right? We didn't care that the circle wasn't perfectly round. It was okay that it was sort of jagged a little bit, okay? So topology is the mathematics of shape, and the joke, I don't know if it's a good joke, but the joke is that topologists cannot tell between a coffee mug and a donut because you can't deform one into the other, as you see in the animation in the middle. So where do you learn about topology? How many of you have taken topology in your courses? Okay, great. So I learned them when I was an undergrad. I went to Universidad del Valle in Colombia. And this is a picture from the Wayback Machine, just to show you how the website looked like in 2007 for the description of the course, right? So in Spanish, right? So topología general, prerequisitos, análisis, teoría de conjuntos, objetivos, preparar al estudiante de matemáticas en los conceptos, propiedades y resultados principales de la teoría de los espacios topológicos abstractos. Al final del curso, el estudiante debe poder reconocer cuándo una propiedad es topológica y cuándo no, y haber aprendido los ejemplos y contraejemplos fundamentales de esta teoría. If you didn't understand what that meant, neither did I, right? Like I read that description in my first semester in Unilateral, and I was like, that sounds boring. I was like, topology, that sounds like topography. I'm not doing that. I ended up doing my honors thesis in topology. And all of this to say, you know, I had no information. I was making sort of outlandish claims. So I ended up graduating from Universidad del Valle. The person that is giving me the diploma is Professor Doris Inestrosa. She passed away a couple of years ago. She was a very warm, energetic, and engaging teacher. At the time, she was the dean of the College of Sciences in Univalle. So it was super special to get my diploma from her. I remember very warmly when I was preparing my applications for PhD programs. We were in her apartment preparing the application packages. So this was back in the day when you had to mail your applications. I mean physically mail, like in a package, in an envelope. So she was one of the letter writers that sort of wrote a recommendation letter for me. And sort of her and the other sort of 4 professors were helping me put the right materials in the right envelopes. Who does that? The memory that comes to mind with this image is that sort of the idea of mentors and the role that they can have in your life. So anyone that tells you, you know, I'm self-made, I got here by myself, is lying to you. You know, we're all here because we had people that sort of believed in us and helped us along the way. You know, our mentors are good. There is sort of not much we can do for them, but we can pay it forward. So if you have, you know, the opportunity to help, do it, okay? So I graduated, you know, great, and I went and got my PhD to do this algebraic topology thing, right? So as I said before, algebraic topology is all about sort of the mathematics of shape, okay? So on the left, we have a sphere, which is the surface of a ball, and on the right, we have a torus, which is the surface of the donut, or S1 cross S1. So in algebraic topology, we try to measure properties of shape, to actually compute stuff that tells you how an object looks like. One of the simplest things we can compute about a shape is the Betti number, okay? So, so the Betti numbers, you get 1 for each n from 0 through infinity, integers. And they, sort of morally speaking, measure the number of holes that your space has in each dimension. So for example, in dimension 0, the Betti numbers count the number of connected components, okay? Or the clusters. So for example, the sphere is all connected, the torus is all connected, and that's why Betty 0 is 1 for both of them. Betty 1 measures the number of one-dimensional holes. Okay, so what is a one-dimensional hole? So what you do is you trace closed curves in your space, and you ask if those curves are bounding a filled-in region. Okay, so for example, on the sphere, every closed curve you draw is always sort of filled in by a spherical cap. So that's why Betty 1 of the sphere is equal to 0. There are no one-dimensional holes. But on the torus, for example, if you draw the blue curve, you can sort of pass your hand through it. And the same for the red curve. You can pass your hand through it because the torus is hollow. So that's why Betty 1 of the torus is 2. You have 2 different types of holes in dimension 1. And then in dimension 2, sort of 2-dimensional holes are sort of voids, right? So they measure sort of closed 2-dimensional stuff encasing sort of an empty 3-dimensional volume. Both the sphere and the torus have that property. So that's why their Betty 2 is 1. So something we know about the Betty numbers is that they are invariant to sort of continuous deformations, right? So in particular, because the Betty numbers of the sphere are different from the torus, it is not possible to deform the sphere continuously onto the torus. Just like the coffee mug. So in the coffee mug, we could deform it into the donut, but the Betty numbers tell us that we cannot deform the torus onto the sphere. So this is Enrico Betty. He was an Italian mathematician, and the Betty numbers are named after him by Henry Poincaré. The definition of the Betty numbers was something very sort of combinatorial, but it sort of took the genius of Emmy Noether to really sort of set it straight. So Emmy Noether realized that the Betty numbers were the shadow of a more complicated object, the homology or the cohomology of the space. And she suggested that we should actually study the algebraic thing directly. And that has been super, super fruitful. So in particular, because we have those Bettys there, we can just replace them by the appropriate cohomology, right? Using that the dimension just tells you what the vector space should be. Emmy Noether is being referred to as the most important woman in mathematics by people like Einstein. She was invited to Göttingen by Alex Klein and David Hilbert. But when she got there, the faculty refused. And they were like, oh, we don't want her here because she's a woman. So she had to lecture under Hilbert for 4 years or so until she was actually confirmed as a full faculty member. So again, the image that this brings to mind is the idea of sort of structural inequalities. Structural inequalities. So again, if you're in a position of power, either help dismantle the structures or do whatever you can to circumvent them. Graduation day. So now this is me, like I want to be in the photo, and those are my parents. So when I was in Univalle, we were driving one day to school, and my dad asked me, to what engineering are you going to switch? Right? Like, not do you want to switch, but to what engineering are you going to switch? I was doing great in mathematics, right? Like analysis was awesome, algebra was super fun. I had no desire to switch to engineering. I think he was sort of conveying his fear that mathematicians might be unemployable. He was wrong, of course. But on graduation day, he was like, I knew it, math was the way, I always told you. So during that drive, he was like, okay, so maybe not engineering, but how about applied math, right? Applied math. And I was like, no, algebra is great, analysis is awesome, applied math. So I went to Stanford to do my PhD in algebraic topology, in pure algebraic topology. Again, hubris. Along the way, I learned about topological data analysis. Sort of the idea that you can actually apply ideas from algebraic topology to solve problems in data science. And this is what I do today. Again, I had no information and sort of made outlandish claims. So how do we think about data in topology? So we think of data as a collection of points in such a way that you can measure distances between them, right? So imagine that you have a bunch of pictures of little duckies, and you can tell if two duckies are similar, or you have text documents. So that's a data set. So if you look at that data set, you see a circle, right? Nod if you see a circle. Yes, yes? Okay, great. So that's your brain playing tricks on you. Because if you compute the Betty numbers, you will see that it's not a circle, right? Betty 0, the number of connected components, is just the number of data points. And Betty 1, which is supposed to capture these loops, is 0 because there is no way to sort of connect a closed curve. But your brain is sort of right? That if you want to look at a data set as a topological object, you should sort of think about how looking at different scales sort of makes the shape evolve. So what we can do is, if 2 points are very close, let's say less than a distance epsilon apart, we can draw an edge between them. And if we've drawn, let's say, 3 edges, we can fill in the triangle. And if we've drawn all the edges between 4 points, we fill in the tetrahedron, and so on. And we can sort of increase the epsilon and see how other things we can connect, okay? So as you can see, as my epsilon increases, I'm connecting more and more stuff, right? At the beginning, only very few things were connected, and holes were forming, connected components were getting created, and then at some point, the circle starts to emerge, right? So what we can do is we can compute topological invariants at each one of those scales, right? So we can compute things like the Betty numbers or the cohomology, and that's exactly what we're gonna do, okay? So this is the philosophy behind topological data analysis, that you can analyze your data set at multiple scales and then try to compute topological invariants about those different scales, right? So as I said, for example, we can compute the Betty numbers. So maybe, for Betty, maybe for K0, we had sort of Betty number beta n equal to 4, right? So we're gonna put a dot per count of Betty number. Okay? But again, remember, Emmy Noether tells you that it is better to think about the algebraic object that is in the back. So we can replace those numbers by actual vector spaces. And I'm putting F for any field, and instead of the count with the dots, I'm putting basis elements. Okay? So each dot is a basis element in that vector space. And then again, the beauty is that now the algebraic object tells you that not only can you put the real numbers as your field, but you can put, Zima 2, or you can put any ring, and you get a module over that ring. Again, the good thing is that not only do you have sort of triangulated spaces at every scale, but they are nested. They are contained into each other. And those sort of inclusions now induce linear transformations between your vector spaces, right? So now the algebra really is helping you track the features, the topological features you see at all these different scales. And how do you track them? With linear algebra, right? So we have now linear transformations and bases in all those vector spaces. So we can just write down the matrices of those linear transformations. So since you all have taken linear algebra, then you probably know about Gaussian elimination, right? One of the basic algorithms. So if you do Gaussian elimination on that matrix, hopefully you get to something simple like that. Okay, so I don't know if you caught it in the back, but we went from the purple basis to the blue basis. And in the blue basis, the matrix looks super, super simple, right? So it tells you that the first basis element goes to the first basis element, the second basis element goes to the second basis element, and the third one goes to 0. Okay, so you can just represent that with arrows. Let's just remember the linear transformation in that fashion. Theorem, one can choose blue bases in such a way that the arrows look like that everywhere. So that is telling you that you can actually track cohomological features across the family of simplicial complexes. And this is what we call the barcode, because it's sort of a signature of how the topology of the data is changing across scales. Okay? So let's go back to one of the first examples, the Taurus. Now we know that these are the cohomology vector spaces, which count components, holes, or voids. I did the following experiment. I took a random sample that is X, and I did exactly what I explained a moment ago. And those are the barcodes that emerge. And hopefully what you can see is that the number of sort of long bars are sort of in correspondence with the dimensions of the cohomology vector spaces. Okay, so what we do in topological data analysis is we compute these types of barcodes to infer the topology underlying the data. Okay, great. So this is the persistent cohomology of data. Okay, questions, complaints? Okay, so let's go back to the little duckies. If you compute the barcodes for this data set, you get the following response, right? So in dimension 0, you get a long bar because the duckies all live sort of close to each other, and then you get a long bar in dimension 1 because the duckies sort of arrange themselves in a circle. So now sort of we got to this point where we can actually compute topological invariance for data sets. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use that. So let's see how it goes. So the first problem I want to share with you is the question of detecting recurrent behavior in time series data. Okay? So time series are super prevalent in data science, and I like them because it is a problem that doesn't sound topological right away. You have to do something tricky to get it to be topological. But again, there are many data sets where it is sort of useful to think about repetition. So what is recurrence and how do we quantify it? So let me show you a technique inspired by dynamical systems. And it's sort of the idea of delay embeddings or sliding window embeddings. So imagine that you have a time series F, and we're going to fix two parameters, tau, which is a positive real number, and d, which is a non-negative integer. Okay? And we're going to do the following. We're going to evaluate F at the points t plus tau, t plus 2 tau, and all the way up to t plus d tau for sort of every t in the domain. Okay? So this essentially discretizes in a vector the window between t and t plus d tau. Okay? And as t varies, what you're doing is you're sliding the window from left to right. Okay? So if you go ahead and put all those vectors together, you get a point cloud, which we call the sliding window point cloud. And what you can prove is that many sort of mathematical properties of the signal f are reflected in the shape of the point cloud that you get on the lower right. For example, if your function is periodic, then the point cloud is going to be a circle. And now we know how to detect circles with barcodes. Here are some examples of how this works. So again, if your time series is periodic, then you get a circle for its sliding window point cloud. If your time series is quasi-periodic, meaning you have sort of linearly independent oscillators, then you get something that looks like a torus. And if you get other types of recurrence, you can get spheres and all other sorts of beautiful stuff. So, we went ahead and sort of applied these to a bunch of problems. And the method that comes out of it is, we call it swipers for its sliding windows and one persistent scoring. Branding is important. So here's how it works. We take your time series, apply the sliding window construction, get a point cloud, do the evolution of triangulated spaces, and compute the barcode. And again, if the time series is periodic, the point cloud is circular, and you should get a long interval in the barcode. By the way, the mathematics of this, which is the first thing we sort of figured out, is in that paper. But one of the first applications was to detecting and analyzing biological clocks in organisms. And again, that is in BMC bioinformatics. But what is the experiment? So imagine a biologist comes to you with an Excel file that looks like this. So there is sort of maybe like 50,000 rows and maybe 48 columns. Okay? And the biologist tells you, the way we got this data was by having a cohort of mice. We synchronized their circadian clocks, and then every hour we took a mouse, and then a piece of the liver of that mouse, and then did a gene expression panel, right? And that gives you a column in this data set. Next hour, take another mouse, do the same thing. Next hour, take another mouse. And then the biologist wants you to sort the rows from most periodic, right, so the shapes are on the left, to less periodic in the bottom. Why? Because they want to identify genes that behave periodically, that are sort of tied to the circadian clock of the mouse. You are not going to do this by hand, of course, because there's 50,000 genes. But here's what this idea of sliding windows and barcodes gives you when you sort the genes by how periodic the signal is using the barcode. So at the top of the sort of scores, you get genes that look very, very periodic. So the mouse really has genes that are tied to this sort of clock. At the bottom, you get genes that do not look periodic at all. So the score is doing something reasonable. And the surprise for us, at least, was that when we looked at sort of several data sets, we started to find genes that looked very periodic to our sort of topological scores. But when you compare them to other methods like Fourier analysis, autocorrelation, stuff like that, they did not look periodic, or at least were not in the top of the rankings. So we were able to sort of find sort of these new genes that look very, very periodic to us. Okay? So topology is winning. This is work with my first PhD, the first PhD student I graduated with Hitesh. So for now, for this last part of the talk, I want to switch the visualization a little bit. So we have our barcodes, which again, sort of long bars are associated to these very sort of strong topological features in the data. We're going to replace them by something called the persistence diagram, right? Where every bar, which let's say starts at A and ends at B, we're going to replace it with the point of coordinates A, B. Okay? And now the length of the bar is going to be the same as the vertical distance from the point to the diagonal. Okay? So if we were looking for very long bars at the beginning, now we're looking for points that are very far from the diagonal. Okay? So here are two signals, cosine of t plus cosine of 3t, periodic. And the other signal is cosine of t plus cosine of pi t, right? So pi and 3 are like similar numerically, maybe, 3.0 and 3.14 or something. But if you compute their sliding windows, something interesting happens. Because this is periodic, you get a circle, and that comes from the fact that the frequencies are commensurate. If you compute the sliding window of the second one, you get a torus. And it's because the frequencies are related via irrational numbers. Okay, and this is something we can detect with topology, right? So again, in dimension 1, we're measuring the number of cycles, and we get the circle rank 1, the torus rank 2 in the persistence diagrams. Okay, so we went ahead and used sort of these insights into a bunch of very, very cool projects. So here's one of them. Here's a video. Right? So you can think of a video as a sequence of images, right? A time series of images. And just like we did sliding windows of numbers, we can do sliding windows of images, right? It's now going to be a vector of images. So here's what the sliding window of this video looks like, right? Because the video is very repetitive, it's circular. Here's another video. So you have two oscillators, and my question for you is, are the frequencies commensurate, meaning one is a rational multiple of the other, or are they incommensurate, right? One is an irrational multiple of the other. If they were commensurate, then they would synchronize at some point, and if they are irrational, they never synchronize, okay? So raise your hand if you think periodic or rational. Okay, let's do it again. Now raise your hand if you think quasi-periodic. Okay, democracy wins today, right? So here's the sliding window point cloud. It is a torus, and you get two generators. So it's telling you that the two frequencies are irrationally related. And we sort of cooked up the example to do that. But all of this to demonstrate that even for humans, we are the gold standard in perception. It is hard to tell that that's the phenomenon that is going on. But the machine is very good at doing that. So we went ahead and collected some data, or got some data from the folks at the speech lab at Michigan State. And they took sort of high-speed videos of the vocal folds vibrating when you say, ah, right? And they wanted to know sort of how different sort of pathologies were reflected in the muscles. So this is a normal person, and this is the sliding window point cloud for that person in the persistence diagrams, right? So you get a circle and then one generator in dimension 1, right? Here's another condition called sort of clinical asymmetry, where you have the vocal folds sort of vibrating at different frequencies. And here's the sliding window of that video and the persistence diagrams on the right. So it's very clearly toroidal. Okay, so we went ahead and collected sort of a larger database, and we're able to sort of apply this automated classification of videos according to the type of movement. So before we did this paper, you essentially had graduate students by hand sort of tracing the vocal folds and trying to figure out what's going on. And so we were very happy that we could do this automatically. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing a pattern emerge. Sort of this idea that you can measure the shape of data sets with things like persistence diagrams or barcodes. And then there are many problems where you want to predict a quantity given that barcode or that persistence diagram, right? You want to predict, is it a Taurus? And the mathematical problem that emerges is a problem in analysis, right? It's the problem of, let's try to understand the continuous functions from the space of all persistence diagrams, abstractly, to the real numbers. And how do we do things like, supervised learning in this setting? Okay, so if I give you data of diagrams with some labels, can you approximate the underlying continuous function? Okay, so that's what is coming up. And let me show you an example as to why that is important. This is a very cool data set, the protein classification benchmark collection. And you have something like 1,300 proteins. Each protein has maybe like 1,000 atoms. And you have sort of 55 different classification tasks. And what you want to do is you want to look at the protein and say something about its function. Okay? And those are the 55 tasks you want to solve. The philosophy in computational chemistry is that the shape of the molecule, the shape of the protein, is tightly related to its function. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the shapes of the proteins and try to use the persistence diagrams as the feature of shape to predict functional stuff. Okay? So this is the game we want to play. We want to try to learn functions from the space of persistence diagrams to the real numbers. Okay? So that's the typical machine learning problem we solve all the time. The theory, if you're curious, came out recently in the FOCM. So if you really want to learn the math behind that, that's where you want to go. But let me tell you the highlights. So abstractly, a persistence diagram is just a collection of points in the sort of wedge W. Okay? And again, we want to learn functions from the collection of all such objects. Okay? So this is what we're going to do. Fix a little f in the space of compactly supported continuous functions from W to the real numbers. Okay? We're going to think of that as an activation function. So the support of f is perhaps the blue region. Okay? And what we're going to do next is we're going to take f and we're going to evaluate it in all the points, in all the red points, and we're going to add up the values. Okay? Claim the function that takes a persistence diagram to this number is a continuous function on the space of all persistence diagrams. I mean, I haven't told you what the topology is in the space of all persistence diagrams, but it's a metric. It's a metric space. Here's a theorem we're able to prove. Suppose you have a compact subset of the space of all persistence diagrams, and that you have a continuous function from that compact subset to the real numbers. So this is going to be the ground truth we want to learn, right? So it's the function that is going to tell you, my protein has function blah, and we want to learn it. So given a compact set in the space of persistence diagrams and a continuous function, the following is true. Given any epsilon, there exist compactly supported functions f1 through fn on the wedge, and a polynomial p, so that this quantity, right? So what you're doing is you are doing the operation we defined in the previous slide for every f1 through fn, and you're evaluating that vector on this polynomial, and the number you get is gonna be epsilon close to the value of the function you want to approximate, okay? So this is a theorem about density. It's saying that we can approximate any function we want approximately well in the compact open topology, okay? So the sort of meat of the paper is designing algorithms to do this using training data, okay? So you don't give me f, but you give me samples of f. And the algorithms produce for you the f1 through fn and the polynomial p, okay? So that's essentially supervised learning. So here's what happened in that paper with the example from the proteins. So again, we computed persistence diagrams for all the proteins, and in average, through all the 55 classification tasks, we got in the order of 98% accuracy, right? So state-of-the-art accuracy in classification. I wanna end with sort of the last story. So far, what we've seen is that in data analysis, there are some questions related to the shape of the data. That we can capture that shape with things like barcodes and persistence diagrams, and that we can also do machine learning on those persistence diagrams to answer interesting questions. The last bit of the talk is something that I'm super excited about, and again, it's sort of this intersection of very pure algebraic topology with sort of very interesting machine learning problems. So the appropriate paper is on the screen. So what is the topology, the algebraic topology bit? So here's an equation. So the Brown representability theorem is a beautiful theorem in algebraic topology. So it connects cohomology to maps to interesting spaces. And in the case of dimension 1, so the first cohomology of a space, of a cellular space with coefficients in Z, it gives you a natural bijection with a collection of homotopy classes of maps from your space to the circle, okay? So it's interpreting something algebraic on the left with something geometric on the right. Beautiful theorem. In particular, it says that whenever you take a cohomology class, and we hope to be able to do that with computers, compute eta, the theorem gives you ways, or at least tells you that there is a function f eta, unique up to homotopy from B to S1, and this function represents eta in a very specific sense, okay? So the sort of transition from left to right, we're gonna call that circular coordinates, okay? Circular coordinatization. What the paper does is it gives you sort of algorithmic ways of doing this for data, okay? So it transformed the algebraic theorem into an algorithm that you can implement in Python. So it goes from the persistent cohomology of the data set, and it gives you a map from your data to the circle that corresponds to that persistent cohomology class. So how does that look like in real life? So imagine that you have a torus, you know, as we always do. And if you compute its persistence diagrams, again, you will see that in dimension 1, you get two classes in orange, sort of the two circles in the torus, and you get a class in green, which is the two-dimensional class. But again, the point is that the orange class labeled 0 and the orange class labeled 1 should give you maps from the data set to the circle. That was the point of the Brown representability theorem. Okay, so this is how it looks like. So what I did is, again, run the algorithm developed in the paper, and then color the points in the data set using the circular coordinates computed with the appropriate cocycles. Okay, so hopefully what you're seeing is that eta 0, meaning the class corresponding to the top, it is measuring the horizontal cycle, and that eta 1 is measuring the vertical cycle. So in particular, we were able to recover the intrinsic parameterization of the space from its cohomology. Okay? Remember the little duckies? So you can go ahead and create a video by just sort of playing the images in order. Okay? Play the images in order. The order is random, of course, because the data came to you randomly. So the video doesn't have much structure to it. But remember the circle? So we can actually compute, sort of without knowing that it's a circle, we can just compute its persistent cohomology and then use the important class we discovered to run it through the circular coordinates algorithm. So now this is giving you a map from the data to the circle corresponding to this class, okay? And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to play a video with the images ordered by their circular coordinate, okay? So at the beginning, when I was talking about models and equations, I told you that in some cases, the model is actually a space, a shape, a circle. So we've arrived, right? So we have our space, S1, and our map, F. And then my last example, in the last 9 minutes I have, is the following. So here's a space that is sort of fascinating to me, the space of unilateral planar pentagons. So imagine the collection of all the pentagons on the plane, side length 1, and you're allowed to rotate and translate and sort of mod out by those equivalence relations. The color is sort of the energy of the pentagon. The more regular it is, the darker it is, lower energy, and the more jagged it is, the higher the energy, the more sort of yellowish. So this is a great, or at least a toy example for the space of molecular dynamics, sort of the idea that you have molecules with energy in other conformations, and you want to know how the space of conformations looks like, okay? So I want to switch to something else, and hopefully you're seeing that. Great. So one of the, sort of my background, as you know now, is in pure topology. That's what I did my PhD on for the first bit, and then I had to switch to the application side. One of the harder things I had to do was to learn how to code. And I just want to show you a demo with the moduli space of unilateral pentagons to just show you how these things look like in real life. So this is a Jupyter notebook. If you haven't used it before, these are great tools to do sort of quick demoing of code and just to get your head around data sets. So I'm going to go ahead and create a data set of the unilateral pentagons as before. So here they are. There is 14,000 of them. And I'm going to go ahead and do the first thing you do when you're analyzing data, which is compute PCA, right? Principal component analysis. So here's PCA of that data set. Right? Again, each dot is supposed to be one of these pentagons, and the color is the energy of the pentagon. What is the shape of the data? Is it a parabola? Is it a circle? Yeah. It is not a Klein bottle, but very good guess, very good guess. So hopefully what you're seeing is that the colors sort of clash, that you have some dark areas near some light areas. And what that tells you is that the PCA is sort of folding the space onto itself, is crossing it. So it's not a very good projection. So it's hard to tell what the shape is. So, but we have more tools now, right? So we can compute things like persistence and the barcodes and the persistence diagrams. And this is what we get. So let me do that again, perhaps bigger. Okay, great. So, so you're getting a bunch of generators in dimension 1 and one generator in dimension 2. Okay? So let's just count how many there are in each dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and compute the vertical distance of the top 10. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that are very far from the diagonal, and then you have the rest. Okay? And in dimension 2, let's see what happens. You get sort of one that is very far from the diagonal, and then the rest. Okay? So again, let's revise our intuition. 8 generators in dimension 1, 1 generator in dimension 2. Any guesses? Not a Klein bottle, right? Okay, what? Can you say that again? 2-hole Taurus. You are close. You are close. I'm not gonna bore you to death with the suspense. I'm gonna go ahead and compute the circular coordinates, and it's running, and it's gonna take a little bit. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna compute sort of 3 circular coordinates for our data, and then visualize the data in the 3 torus, right? In S1 cross S1 cross S1. Does that make sense? So again, I'm gonna compute 3 circular coordinates, and I'm gonna visualize the data in S1 cross S1 cross S1 instead of R3. So this is how the data looks like. So again, this is the 3 torus. The ambient space is the 3 torus, meaning the left wall is identified with the right wall, the back wall is identified with the front, and the bottom with the top. So there is no self-intersection, so this is actually an embedding, okay? So if you track the identifications, you will see that the top here is identified with the bottom here, the top here is identified with the bottom here, this left is identified with that right, and then from the other side, this guy here is identified with that guy here. How many handles is that? 4. So this is a 4-hole torus. So you were very close. So this is what we get out of the analysis. Okay, so the space, this is sort of the last nugget of wisdom. The space of unilateral pentagons is a surface of genus 4. Okay. With a little bit more code, one can do sort of really cool things to get your intuition right. So for example, you can go ahead and really get in there, really get inside the data and actually look how their pentagons are sort of aligned in the torus. Okay. So let me go ahead and get back to the business at hand. So how did I get here? Originally from Cali, Colombia, football, magical realism, and salsa. I went to Stanford for my PhD in mathematics, and then the rallying cry for the sports team is fear the tree. Fear the tree. I always thought that was the weakest rallying cry ever. Right, Stanford, a very prestigious university, where I failed my first midterm ever. I failed the analysis midterm, on my first quarter. And I also failed the algebra qual, right? So the qualifying exams are a big deal. If you fail them, they kick you out of the program. So I'm happy to say that I passed the qualifying exam later. And next semester, I'm teaching the qualifying exam in algebra in my university. It is also, retaking that exam helped me learn a lot of the algebra that I use today in my research. Then I went to Duke for my postdoc, right, another prestigious university. And I thought very seriously about leaving academia. I work in data analysis, so I have many opportunities outside academia. And I saw a lot of my friends that were, super smart people struggle in the academic work environment. But I was sort of lucky and was able to sort of come to a place that I'm happy with a job that I'm happy with. So I got my first job at Michigan State. And then we went through it together, right? The burnout of 2020. But then I got tenure, right? It's great, one of the big milestones in the academic career. And I moved to Northeastern, where I'm a faculty member today. So how did I get here? Through a bunch of ups and downs. Sort of many times when you introduce speakers and talk about your colleagues, you only talk about the top of the curve, right? You talk about the accolades. And I think it's important to normalize failure. We all had them. We all get rejected papers that we have to rewrite and resend, and that's okay. Thank you.